Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people. And the hope is that as we listen, we'll be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "There are no ordinary people. You and I have never talked to a mere mortal. It's my joy over the next few moments to introduce you to somebody who, to themselves especially, may seem rather ordinary. But they are a really cool person. Today, we're going to meet Alex Green. Now, if you just heard some details about Alex, like he's a dad with four teenage daughters, that would give you an insight. If you learned that he was an engineer, that would give you an insight into into who he is. But then when you hear Alex talk, you know there's something different. Alex is unique. He was born in Zimbabwe. He took university in South Africa. And he's got a fantastic story about how he met his wife and how that romance unfolded. I invite you to lean in and to listen to this fantastic story of Alex Green. Well, today we are happy to welcome into the studio Alex Green. And Alex, thanks so much for being in here.
Jason, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let's start with your story.
Okay, I guess I'll start. I'm a little different. Come from a faraway land, born in Zimbabwe. My parents were not missionaries. Actually, the first Green who landed in Africa was an organ repairman who landed in Cape Town, South Africa, back in the late 1800s. And from there, I think the Green family in the Cape went on to do pretty well for themselves, owned substantial orchards, apple orchards, and grape vineyards. So they were pretty successful. And then unfortunately, my grandfather decided to marry someone who was not approved of by the family. And so we were disowned. So I don't know that side of the family at all. But anyway, my grandfather ended up in Zimbabwe. They moved up from South Africa and farmed up there. And that's on my dad's side. And then, pretty much my dad was a farmer all of his life. It was a great childhood being raised on a farm. I went to a boarding school from the age of 7. That was just the done thing in Zimbabwe. The schools where we lived, it was a very rural area. Obviously, we're not that great. So we were just shipped off to boarding school, would stay at school for it's more like 3 to 4 weeks at a time, come home for the odd weekend. But I didn't know any different. So it was really great schools. I mean, the education was fantastic. They kept us so busy. We didn't have much time to miss our parents. It was a pretty unique, but I would say, just as I said, that's all I ever knew. So it was a great education, and I think I turned out mostly okay. From there, went on to study in South Africa, the University of Cape Town. I got my degree in engineering, and then went on to get a master's degree as well. And by the end of that, got a job offer in Orlando, Florida. So literally did that job interview over the phone. And before I'd even had a chance to complete my master's thesis, was sent off to Orlando, Florida, landed with my 2 suitcases, and basically started a trial period with that company, a very small engineering company. And the reason I guess I got in there was that the owner of the company was an ex-alum from the University of Cape Town and was still doing some business with a professor of mine. So that's how that connection came through. Uh-huh. Spent some good years in Orlando, made some great friends, and then met my wife there, or my to-be wife. She was also, had started her first job in Orlando, Florida. So we met randomly at a country line dance bar. Long story. I do not country line dance. And we were great friends for a couple of years, and then she moved back to Springfield. to go back to college. She had started her job in graphic design. She is a raging extrovert, could not handle being behind a computer screen for 40 hours a week. So went back to school to study social work, got her master's in social work. And it was actually only after she moved that we started dating. So we stayed close friends. And I was actually quite depressed one Christmas. I could not afford to go home back to Zimbabwe. So I was feeling kind of stuck and depressed. And Miriam invited me to come and spend Christmas in Missouri, show me the Midwest, you know. There's good people here, she said. So I came out and, yeah, we basically got together then and haven't looked back since. And this will be our 20th year. We just actually did, had our 20th anniversary. So.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That also coincided with when I became a Christian. So that was just a crazy process. And I think God had been working on me for many years. I'm a little slow, so it took me a minute. But so then moved out here and started working for Watts, who I still work for, Watts Water Technologies. So that's 20 years later now. Moved from engineering into sales. We moved away to Boston for 3 years and Nashville for a year. And that was really to get out of engineering into sales. I'm very blessed to still have that job. And 4 beautiful daughters, and life is good. So there's where I am so far in a very brief nutshell.
That's a great story.
Well, thank you.
There are a lot of things within that story that we can explore, and interesting timelines or time, kind of demarcations that you describe, like your early childhood, early days in the States, and then coming to Springfield, or that whole process, like 20 years ago, getting married, becoming a follower of Christ, and then the work that you're in now and starting your family. That's a lot of different arenas to jump into.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's go back into your childhood, your early days, growing up in Zimbabwe. And it was an interesting, somewhat interesting to me anyways, where you talked about how your grandfather was married somebody that wasn't approved of. And how did that story, obviously on the one hand, you seem to indicate that it cut him off from the rest of the family, maybe some of the wealth that was there, some of the other assets that had been just in general assets like knowledge and other things that were accumulated. But the family relationships, how'd that impact, your parents' development, your development as a kid? How was that told and unpacked?
We only found out about it much later. So it was just never talked about when we were younger. My grandmother, so my dad's father, still lived in the Cape. We would go down and visit her. But the story was just never mentioned. So we were none the wiser. There was some talk of, some grandfathers. I think when I was very young, I met, I think it was one of her brothers. But so honestly, I don't think it had much impact at all. We were just none the wiser. We had a great upbringing on the farm. And I would say it had very little impact. It was only much later in life when, you start having those conversations with your parents, I think, when they feel like you can understand. And then we were like, what? There's all these people and yes, significant wealth. It's the Green family there is a very wealthy family, but I don't think I would trade it now. It's, I've seen what wealth can do, to people. So no, I wouldn't trade it.
So what was it like to grow up on a farm in Zimbabwe? I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, not in Missouri, but in another Midwest town. And so I've got a lot of keen memories of that experience. What was it like to grow up in Zimbabwe in a another continent from where we're at now.
Very different from the farming that I've seen here. Labor in Zimbabwe is pretty cheap, so we have a lot of we supported. I think it was about 100 families that worked and lived on the farm, and the experience was, I would say, just the best of both worlds, because we lived about an hour from the capital city, Harare, so we could, live on the farm. Grew up riding, dirt bikes around the farm, going fishing. We had a river right there. Just taking our dogs for long walks, off the leash around the whole, not the whole property. It was a pretty large farm. So it was just idyllic from a kid's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the boarding school cut into it, significantly. So we would kind of dread going back after those short weekends. But it was a great experience, and I got to see my dad and how he treated his workers, which was always fairly, I felt.
Mm-hmm.
He did anything he could to help them. The workers on our farm were, pretty poor in general, but before we lost the farm to the government, that's another whole story. But, he got to the point where he was actually building them proper houses, because up to that point, they were living in essentially mud huts
Mm-hmm.
that they had constructed themselves. That's just traditional huts. So, yeah, it was just neat to grow up and see how he treated people. Even though he didn't have to do certain things for them, he wanted them to improve their lives as well. So that was pretty neat.
What kind of things grew on the farm?
So the primary crop was tobacco, and then beef cattle, and we would say maize, but corn.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a big farm. When I say big, it was like 2,500 acres. Not all of it farmed, so there were large areas that were just rough, rocks and I guess copies we would call them, but so a good sized farm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about a medium sized farm, I guess, in Zimbabwe.
Okay. Yeah. And then you just mentioned that until you lost the farm.
Yes.
Can you unpack a little bit about that?
Sure.
When that took place and how that played a part in your future development?
Absolutely. So a very brief history lesson. So Zimbabwe was ruled by the white minority essentially until the early 70s, when there was a civil war, and the blacks, rose up essentially, and that war went until 1980, when Robert Mugabe came into power. And when he came into power, he promised everyone who fought for him land. That's, the most precious thing
Mm-hmm.
to Zimbabweans at the time was, hey, give me some land. I can grow my own food. I'll be happy. Like many corrupt governments, he did nothing about that. And so by the late 90s, the people basically started saying, hey, you promised us land all these years ago. Where's our land? Now, the Commercial Farmers Union, obviously most of the land was owned by commercial farmers,
Mm-hmm.
white commercial farmers. And they had known about this. So they had drafted plans to say to the government, hey, we can allocate land. We will train people how to farm. So there was a plan in place. Unfortunately, the government totally ignored that and encouraged the masses to just go and take the land. And in some cases, sponsored them, gave them drugs and alcohol. So these mobs would literally move onto a farm, intimidate the owners until they left, and in some cases were killed. So one of our neighbors was literally bludgeoned to death, on his doorstep on a Sunday afternoon, which was awful. So my dad actually had to move into the city for about 3 months. My parents moved off the farm just because, literally fearing for their lives. So in that process, our farm was allocated to an indigenous farmer who, luckily for us, was a reasonable guy. There were many who were not, who just literally came on, literally at gunpoint said, pack a bag and leave. And as you know, most farmers, everything is invested in the farm, right?
Right.
You can't pick up. And so it was awful for a lot of people. But so my dad had some time to sell off some equipment and then move off the farm, even though they still had, and to this day still have the deeds to that farm. So it's just, like, unfortunately, it's Africa. It's what I learned from that was that Africa is a very unpredictable place. The rule of law does not necessarily apply. My older brother had always wanted to farm. I watched my parents suffer through that, just relying on the weather for your income. All that stuff was just, I could never see myself doing it. So, but yeah, it's Africa's still a bit of a scary place. It's beautiful and the people are amazing, but the governments there, unfortunately, have just made it so difficult.
There are some similar stories arising at the present out of South Africa.
Absolutely.
And so some of the same stories of the late 90s are seemingly reoccurring once again.
Yes, I think it's slightly more isolated there. Mm-hmm. So you do see violence on the farms, people just, mobs coming on. But I don't think it has the same government support that it did in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, it was literally a government-sponsored mass rush on the land, essentially.
Yeah.
So the end of that story, actually, is that after all these years, so that was the late 90s, here we are, 2024, and the government has finally realized that without land rights, no one is going to invest in the country, right? If land is not safe, no one's going to invest. So they have been working with the World Bank, the IMF, to come up with a program to essentially pay out farmers who lost their land. It's pretty contentious. A lot of the farmers have not agreed to the terms. My parents, they've been off the farm since, about 2000, when was it? Yeah, about 2000. So they're used to, not being there. They've tired of fighting, so they've signed on. And so they will, I think, over the next 10 years be paid out for the farm, a fraction of what it's truly worth. But at least they'll get something. So it's, it's crazy.
So were you still there? Were you still in Zimbabwe when all this took place?
I was actually studying in Cape Town in South Africa. So it was pretty scary because I would call them once a week. I still call them once a week. And get the updates, hear stuff on the news. So it was pretty scary.
As a kid, you mentioned going to the boarding school. Mm-hmm. It was fun. What kind of activities would the boarding school have to keep you engaged and not missing home, not missing your parents?
They had about everything that I could possibly imagine a school offering. So it was a pretty rural school. It was, I would say, about an hour and a half away from the capital city, but in some beautiful bush. I'm trying to think of the best word to describe the land around there. We call them koppies. It's essentially balancing rocks, so these old rock formations that are just perfect for kids to climb. So, for example, on Sundays, we were allowed to go. It was an organized, hike, essentially. But we would go to certain koppies and you'd be allowed to just scramble and climb all over these things all morning. It was in the afternoon. But so that kind of stuff, then all of the sports, that we played. So rugby, hockey, tennis, squash. There was shooting club, sailing club, fishing club, chess. There was so many options. So you were exposed to, anything you chose to be exposed to, really. So it was a really well-rounded education.
What was your sport of choice?
I was kind of an average player of most. So I really enjoyed swimming. Backstroke was my strength. I loved squash. I played squash even, after school, just casually, with friends. That was something fun that we did even at university. And then cricket, rugby, I played them all. I would say I was just average, but still enjoyed it. The team spirit, the camaraderie from all that. It was great fun.
What kind of entertainment did you take in when you were growing up, or when you were in university, like music or movies, or what influenced you in that regard?
I would say my main form of entertainment in those days was drinking. I was a wild one. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's one thing that I inherited, and I think it's maybe a Zimbabwean issue. Just that was the main form of entertainment, So I watched my parents just growing up, and they would, drink quite a bit, go to parties and things, and so by the time I got to university, oh man, I was a pretty heavy drinker. I think I do have some regrets there around that. I think it was all I knew to do to have fun. I think I could have had a lot more fun if that wasn't my focus. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
We still had a great time living on the coast, so we would go beautiful mountains around the Cape Town area. We would do hikes and things. So there were some just great things to do around there. But unfortunately, I think most of my fun centered around drinking. Thankfully, about 2 years ago, I realized it was a little much for me to handle. So I haven't had a drink for just over 2 years.
Did you ever go to AA?
I did not. I read the book, and that was enough to scare the living daylights out of me.
Bless you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, so that's an issue that I think, I know one of your questions here is, what would you do? I would love to educate, I think, kind of university-age kids, just to say, if you're into it, don't make it your only thing. There's so much more to life than just drinking. For some people, it's not an issue at all, right? It really is.
Yeah.
They can have one drink, and that's good enough. And for me, it was never enough.
So you came to Orlando.
Yes.
And you've got this experience of living in South Africa and Zimbabwe. What are your first impressions about coming to America?
Man, it was, well, most movies are American, right?
Mm-hmm.
That get circulated around the world. So I had some sense of what America would be like. The company that I was working for some reason, I thought it would be bigger. It was not. It was literally 6 of us in the company, very small. So that was kind of I guess I should have asked more questions. But in general, I think it was as I expected. One of the things I struggled with the most was grocery shopping when I came here. Just the number of options. So grocery shopping in Zimbabwe, there's one small section of an aisle dedicated to cereal. You may have 4 choices of various cereals. Here you have a whole aisle. So it would take me forever. When I first got here, it was just mind-blowing how many choices there were for everything, and it was the other part I really struggled with in Orlando, especially, was obviously when I landed, I didn't have a car. I didn't realize that you had to be 25 if you didn't have a U.S. driver's license to get insurance. So I couldn't even own a car. I was 24 when I landed. So for the first 4 or 5 months that I lived here, my boss would literally have to come and pick me up to go to work. Now, fortunately for him, the first 3 months of that were spent at a Days Inn. Close to work. That almost broke me. That was terrible. But eventually I moved in with a roommate, who lived fairly close by. We went to college and just picked a random name. And so I roomed with a guy and eventually got my own car and, started settling down. But, that Days Inn deal, that was rough.
What is it? A young single guy doing a Days Inn?
Very little. Oh man. I literally had to walk. There was a little microbrew / restaurant. I forget the name of it. But it was, half a mile down the road. And that was I would go and hang out, got to know the bar lady or whatever. So, we'd go have out a couple of drinks and that was it,
Oh my goodness.
My boss was really nice. So him and his family would have me out some weekends and, to his place on the lake. And so that was fine. But it was a rough start.
Yeah. What kind of engineering firm was it? And what kind of engineering background do you have? Because people who are engineers are going to want to know what kind of engineer you are.
Sure. So it was a little oddball. I studied electromechanical engineering. So it was a combination degree of the two, which was very cool. So that ended up in courses like robotics, where we got to actually build and program a robot. So that was fun. And then, not knowing what to do with myself after getting my degree, decided to stay for a master's. Literally, I was like, because options in Zimbabwe were pretty slim for engineers. So basically continued my undergraduate thesis, which was to do with ultrasonic transducers. Just random, right? I mean, but it's an electromechanical device used for things like, a jewelry cleaner. I'm not sure if you've seen those little tubs. So that's an ultrasonic device. Also used by the Navy for sonar, that kind of stuff. And the company that hired me was in that world. So they built ultrasonic transducers for the Navy, for Navy test labs and such. And then their cash cow was a ultrasonic tool that you'd put down a borehole to look for oil. So just a very, very niche little world that I lived in. And then when I moved here, obviously none of that experience helped me out. Just the fact that I was an engineer. And then Miriam, the church that Miriam went to was run by an amazing guy, Mike Childs, who to this day I'm still very close with. But he interviewed me and said, "Hey, we don't have anything yet, but we're just going to bring you on and we'll find something." So I started out in QC and then worked my way up to engineering manager in the end before I transitioned out of sales. So it was a great experience.
So what do you think that's like to go from you're in sales right now?
Yes.
So to go from doing the work of engineering and then transitioning into sales, do you miss the engineering side?
No. I think I try to explain. I think there are engineers. These are folks who really get excited by the spreadsheets, by going deep into the technical stuff. I was always interested in the technical stuff, but I didn't need to go that deep. So I think I always, even when I was in engineering, I was more on the project management side. I was doing, kind of product development, managing those projects. So that was always more interesting to me. And you're dealing with people, and that's what I figured out when I was invited on some sales calls to be kind of technical backup for the sales team that I'm with now. I was like, oh, this is kind of fun, having that technical background, but I get to be more with the people. So that's a lot of my job right now, is building those relationships. But having the technical background is a great advantage. So it's worked out really well.
You describe Miriam as an extrovert.
Oh, yes. She needs people all the time.
How about you?
I think I'm more of an omnivert, I guess is the word. I do enjoy people, but I can be by myself too. I can enjoy some quiet time, reading, that kind of stuff. So
somewhere in the midst of all that, you talked about how you became a follower of Christ.
Yes.
How did that happen?
So the boarding schools I went to, let me back it up further. So my parents are not Christian. I think they have been hurt by Christians in the past. They have looked at Christians and, Christians who talk the talk but didn't necessarily walk the walk. So I think they have some baggage. Still sent us to Christian boarding schools there was, I think, just the best schools happened to be Christian. So I grew up going to church regularly. Didn't really understand it. Didn't really, to me, it was more of this is just what we do. I didn't really have a good understanding of the grace, that came along with it. So yeah, I would say I had some baggage. My mom was, and probably still is, pretty much into that new agey kind of stuff. So I was tending down that path, reading those books. And but when I met Miriam and her best friend Leah, they were living together in Florida, and all of us became very good friends. Leah worked in the church, and as a DCE, Director of Christian Education.
Mm-hmm.
So her Friday was really a Thursday because weekends she was very busy. So we came up with this thing, Thursday night therapy, TNT, yeah, where that was the night we could hang out. So the three of us would often hang out, have a bottle of wine, and just drink and chat, and just conversations with them, and them asking probing questions that the New Age world had no answers for. Kind of got me thinking. I would say the Christian upbringing in the boarding school realm had planted the seed. I always, I was kind of before a math test, pull out a Bible, Lord, please help me, kind of thing. That was about as far as it got. I think, yeah, so that had planted the seed. And then by the time I was having those conversations with Miriam and Leah, it really started, having an impact. And then the church that Leah worked at, the pastor there was a great guy. So he said, hey, if you ever need to talk, let's go grab a beer, we'll talk. And so many discussions with him. And yeah, I would say that just pulled me closer and closer. And eventually I became a member of that church and haven't looked back since. It's been I would say a relief. I look at people today in the world and who are not believers, and I don't know how they do it, because not having that bedrock to lean back on in today's crazy world it's just too much. So,
is there a moment where you knew that you'd gone from being a non-believer to a believer?
I would say it was right around when Mel Gibson's The Passion came out.
Yeah.
I watched that and literally went to the church. It was pretty late that night, but I just sat there and kind of cried and said, Lord, help me, forgive me, and I'm yours. That movie really had an impact, I think. And I think, that visual world has a way of getting through to you like other mediums, have a hard time getting through. So we're enjoying what's it called? The Chosen, I think, on Netflix. It really just brings the Bible to life in ways that, and gives those characters who we've talked about for years, Paul and all the disciples, gives them personalities. And it just, yeah. So I think that it made it so much more real for me. So from that day on, that's a tough one though.
That's a very tough film.
Very tough.
Talk about your romance with Miriam.
I have to be careful here because I'm sure she's going to listen. But so, oh man, okay. I'll try to keep it a little brief. So as I said, we were all good friends. Shortly after we became friends, let me back this up some more. So the night we met, the Country Line Dance Bar, I had been drugged there by my roommate, who was from Texas. So he liked two-step. I didn't even know what he was talking about. Miriam had been drugged there by her friend, whose birthday was on September 11th, the September 11th. So obviously she didn't celebrate that year. And it was about 6 months later. So it was her half birthday. And she said, hey, we're going to go celebrate. And she liked to do all of these, country line dances. So Carl, my roommate, this was a really bad bar. Just, I was not having a good time. I was sitting in a corner drinking my beer and watching him ask all these people to dance. And so Miriam had a group of, I want to say about 6 or 7 of her friends there. And so he was dancing with them, and I was just sitting. I'm like, I don't even know how to dance, whatever. But eventually he said, come on, these girls want to talk to you. So he dragged me over there. Got chatting. They talked about why they were there for their friend's birthday. And then like, oh, when's your birthday? I said, June 28th. She said, what? I don't believe you, because that's Miriam's birthday. So told me to pull out my license. I was like, here we go, June 28th. She was like, oh, she thought it was some cheap pickup line. Anyway, so we became good friends after that and decided to have a shared birthday party. Now, when I first got to Orlando, shortly after, being there a couple months, I would say, I met a fellow South African, Graham, who is still a good friend today. But I'm wild. He's wilder at this point. So we are bad for each other in terms of partying. And he shared the same birthday. So we were same day, same year. Miriam's 3 years younger than me. But we all decided, okay, let's have a party at this Irish bar. Needless to say, drank too much, professed my undying love to Miriam's best friend, Leah. So that didn't go so well. She, patted my hand and said, that's nice. And they left, anyway. But I called in the next morning. Miriam was horrified and said, why are you even answering his call kind of thing? But we became very good friends, as I said. We started that Thursday night therapy. So we were all great friends for a couple of years. Let's see. Miriam moved back to Springfield to get her master's in social work. And had been invited to a wedding of a mutual friend of hers and Leah's in Omaha, Nebraska. So I was going to go as Leah's date. We were going to meet Miriam. All of us would be back together. So it would be a fun little time. Anyway, Miriam ended up kissing her date. And at this point, I had pretty strong feelings for Miriam. We had been doing a lot of 5Ks, before we left. We were still talking on the phone just about every night. So I had been pretty excited to see her, ever hopeful. But she had once said to me that she would never date a friend again. And we were definitely friends, pretty good friends, because she had had a bad experience like that. So I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Anyway, so she kissed this guy, didn't really mean anything to her, but it was just it hurt me pretty badly. So it was that Christmas that I was like, I'm done. I'm going to leave the U.S. And she invited me, to come and spend Christmas with her. So it was actually that night. Oh, man. We went must have been like a 3-hour walk around her neighborhood and just talked and talked and talked and talked. And eventually I said some cheesy line like, you make me want to be a better man or something along those lines, which she did, it wasn't, I meant it. And, but yes, we finally kissed. She said it was very weird, like kissing her brother because we were such good friends. But after that, it was, because that was Christmas and we were engaged by Valentine's. That was a crazy time because we had talked and talking about, we knew we were going to get married pretty much. But I had to try to surprise her for, the actual engagement. And I knew she was coming to visit me in Orlando. And I was laying in bed that Saturday morning thinking, oh, man, well, I'm going to see her this, because we had planned some other trips. I'm going to see her this date and this date. And then I realized, I have to do it today. So I scrambled out of bed, ran to the jewelry store, tried to put all the stuff together for her favorite meal. Oh man, it was insane. It really was. And even when I asked her, she was kind of incredulous. She was like, what? So it was a surprise, thankfully. But I was a hot, sweaty mess by the end of that meal. And oh gosh, so a fun story, but very, very grateful to have her in my life. She is everything for me.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And you got 4 teenage daughters.
Yes.
What's it like to be a dad with 4 teenage daughters? And you added an exchange student daughter this year.
I hear you. That has been one of the best things we ever decided to do was have kids. And 4 even, we can't imagine life without them. And I grew up all boys. My family history has been boys for years, generations. So I'm not sure where all these girls came from, but thankfully Miriam is an amazing mother. So we have muddled our way through, and they're really sweet girls. They just, for the most part, they are still teenagers, so they have their moments. But it has been, I'll say, the honor of my life to be their dad. And it's, I think, another of your questions here, how do you spend most of your time? And I think that's where my life is focused right now. It's just around family. Miriam does such a good job of reminding us the importance of family and being together. So we fight for every dinner together, even though kids are going 16 different directions. Every night that we can sit down and have a meal at the table, we fight for it. And that's a fight now because there are boyfriends involved. So we have to fight hard.
Yes, you do. There are plenty of things that will take away that dinner time.
Oh, in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Man, you've got to be so careful because before you know it, it's been, a week and you've not all been together at one time. So it's very important for us. And yeah, we do try to stick to it.
What are you looking forward to, or planning on out in the future? Not necessarily like long-term future, but somewhat near-term, but where you can see it, but you can't do it today.
I would love to take all the kids back to Zimbabwe. It's just so horrifically expensive at the moment. And time is the other part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we go, we want to spend a significant amount of time there. And with school, all of it just makes it so hard. So I'm not sure when, but that is definitely a dream, is to take them back and show them, right? See where Dad came from, what it was like. I wish I could show them the farm because that is a big part of, where I spent my life. So yeah, I would say one day that would be amazing. No, otherwise I just look forward to seeing who they become. It's one of the joys of being a dad, right? Is watching your kids grow and develop and figure themselves out. And, so yeah, we just can't wait. The older girls are looking at college now and, have some direction. But yeah, just I'm so excited to watch them grow and see how they do. Yeah.
That's a great space to be in.
Yeah.
And don't rush it because before long, it's over.
Yeah. Well, it's a blink of an eye. It doesn't feel like yesterday that they were just, toddlers and we were losing our minds and it was crazy times. But yeah, wouldn't change it for the world.
You had some advice earlier for college students, but maybe you've got some advice for parents with young kids.
Oh, just hang in there, And unfortunately, those sayings that everybody says, there's a reason that everybody says them. The days are long, but the years are short. It absolutely feels that way. And I distinctly remember people saying to us, "Oh man, before you know it, And it does. The years fly by. You look back. So yeah, every time has a season. And that too shall pass. I'm trying to think of anything else. I would say try to focus on the fun and being together. Life can get heavy at times, trying to keep up with all the things that are required these days. But I would say focus on spending time together, having fun, and don't succumb to the pressures of the world if you can, especially around sports. I think that's a U.S., I don't want to call it a disease, but I think it's something that we've gotten so wrong here, where kids get so into sports that it really sucks up their lives and the families' lives, right? The club sports and all that. I don't know. I'm not that sporty, so maybe that's just my opinion. But I would say make sure you're doing what you want to do for your family.
Some great words.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alex, thank you so much for this time. Thanks for sharing your story, your wisdom, what you've learned, where you've come from. It means a lot.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Well, a big thank you to Alex for sharing his story. In listening to Alex, I hope that you found yourself inspired, encouraged, or challenged, and that you begin to behold the really cool people that are around you. The Really Cool People podcast is a production of Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is the executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us with this podcast by liking, reviewing, and sharing to your friends and family. Until next time, stay cool.